Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive.
Quite frankly, I get most of my news from you.
Joan Esposito.
Y'all ready for this?
On WCPT 820.
All right, it is Friday, December 13th. Don't you for a second think that December 13th, Friday the 13th, is an unlucky day. That is just not true. Oddly enough, throughout my life, I have found that the 13th tends to be a very lucky number for me. So I extend that to you. I will offer you my protection on this Friday the 13th. I hope you're making plans to do something extraordinary this weekend. It is Friday, and we have the phone lines open right now, 773-763-9278, 773-763-9278. You can call in and chat with Lady B. You can shoot me a text on that line. We are going to keep all of the phone lines open for the first half of the show, and then I'm really excited. Our good friend Spencer Critchley is going to be coming back. You know, he's the author of Patriots of Two Nations and host of the podcast Dastardly Cleverness in the Service of Good. He is writing a new book. And he is, instead of going the traditional route, which is, spending a year or two writing and getting it into print in another 6 months, he's releasing the book chapter by chapter. So we are going to talk to Spencer today. He's going to tell us about the new book. It is, of course, political. And we are going to discuss what he has written so far. As a matter of fact, I think he might already have 2 chapters out, but as he publishes these chapters, we're going to talk to him every time a new chapter comes out, and we are going to discover what his writing is. And don't worry, when he comes on, I'm not exactly 100% sure where he is publishing this. I don't know if he's created a Substack or something like that. So we will find out. So this will be think of this as our WCPT book club. 1 chapter at a time with the author leading our discussion as he publishes this. I think it could be a whole lot of fun for us. So, news of the day. Lots of news of the day. We talked about this just a hair yesterday, but I think it's worth repeating. You know how many people said, that they were going to vote, they wanted a change. They were going to vote for Donald Trump because prices were just too high. Going to the grocery store, it's just too expensive. And Donald Trump said he was going to fix that. And by God, I'm going to vote for him because I think that I'm paying too much. I heard more than one person say that. Even Brian Williams, the former NBC host, he did that election night special for Amazon Prime. And he was talking after the election to one of the late night hosts. And he said, in addition to being a big fancy pants anchor man, he's a volunteer firefighter where he lives. And he talks to a lot of people in his neighborhood. And he said, in his neighborhood, a 12-pack of Bounty paper towels was close to $40. And he said, that's untenable. He said, now most people have already switched over to Sparkle, whatever Sparkle is. But he said, it's kind of like, what did people expect to happen when there was that kind of disillusionment? Well, and I know that Donald Trump cannot be believed, that Donald Trump tells people in the moment what they want to hear. In the moment, he says whatever puts him in the best light. It doesn't have any connection with something that's true. It doesn't have any connection with what he's really going to do. And today, or this week, we got the proof of that. Donald Trump did an interview and said, he can't guarantee that grocery prices are going to come down. You know why? Because it's hard. It's hard to bring down prices when they're high. I can't guarantee that grocery prices are going to come down because it's hard to bring down prices. So if you know somebody who voted for Donald Trump because they think they're paying too much at the grocery store, yeah. If you, I'm not saying that prices haven't gone up, but remember, this didn't get a lot of attention, but there was some executive with Kellogg's. He probably had retired or quit. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been so honest. He was testifying this last year before Congress, and he said quite bluntly, yes, during COVID, there were supply chain issues, and everybody raised their prices because it was difficult to get the product made, and it was scarce. But nobody lowered those prices after the supply chain started working again. And he said, look at these companies. Look at their yearly statements to shareholders. They're making more profit than they've made in the last decade. Why? Because they raised all their prices during COVID, and they kept them there. This is the kind of stuff that, had there been a second Democratic term, Democrats were ready to go after these companies. Elizabeth Warren was particularly good at calling this out. So, yeah, a lot of these prices are high because you know what? We learned during COVID to pay those prices. We didn't stop buying stuff. So why should they bring the prices down? Boomtown, boom times. So Donald Trump is now finally saying, those grocery prices, they're probably not going to come down because, it's hard. It's hard to bring down prices when they're high. Ugh. That's the first bit of bad news for Trump voters. And then wait till the mass deportations, not even the deportations, but the roundups. Wait till the roundups start and all the people who said, well, he's not going to come after me. I'm a good immigrant. Yeah. Let's see how in the long term all that works out. We'll see. Remember, when Donald Trump was in the White House before, he was not a well-liked president. Have people forgotten that they didn't like him last time around? That he made lives more expensive, more difficult, and he was an all-around bad guy? Well, we're going to learn that lesson again. Let's go to our good friend Jim, calling in from Chicago. Hello, Jim.
Hi, Joan. I just want to comment on two of his adroit choices for the cabinet, the wrestling contingency. Now, she has protected some pedophile for 20 years, apparently, from the gendarmes. How she did it, I have no idea. And her husband raped a referee. I don't know if it was a man or a woman. Rape is rape, Joan. But what are those two? What are the two wrestling people? What are they running for? What does he have? What are they in line for, Joan?
I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, I can't remember.
I mean, it's a conglomeration. I call it the clown cabinet. I mean, it's a conglomeration of misfit toys that Donald Trump is putting together.
Yeah, right. But could we expect, now you said that the recess appointments, is that off the table, Joan, do you think? I know that you were not clairvoyant.
The Senate, and the Republicans in the Senate, as you know and I know, are capable of changing their mind and their stance at any moment. But what John Thune, the leader of the Republicans in the Senate, what he has said and what others have echoed is that while they are willing to allow lesser appointments to be made directly by Trump during a recess, things like the example given was head of the National Labor Relations Board and stuff like that, the word so far, and, you know, this is subject to change as soon as there's any kind of pressure put on them, but the word so far is that the cabinet choices, that's too important. That is literally one of the main reasons that the Senate lives. That's that to wield that kind of power to check these nominees. Thune has said that the people Trump wants in his cabinet will be subject to hearings and the entire confirmation process. That is what they've said so far. And unless Donald calls them up and yells at them, and then they decide to change their tune, that's where it stands so far.
And Joan, let's face it. President Joe Biden picked some of the best, Blinken, Sullivan. I mean, you can go on and on and on. The transportation czar from Indiana, they were terrific. And he's replacing him with these absolute incompetent idiots. And I mean, I hope the American public, when the ones that voted for Trump, I hope they rub their nose in it when they watch these hearings and they find out how crazy these people are. You know, how incompetent they are for these positions. I mean, he can he's not going for competence this time around.
No. He's going for loyalty. If you have been fiercely loyal to Donald Trump, that's the only qualification that matters to him. You know, no, Kash Patel isn't qualified. He's a fry short of a Happy Meal, for God's sake. He's not qualified to lead the FBI. You know, there are Republicans on the Hill who believe that Tulsi Gabbard just might be working for the Russians, and she's going to be our director of intelligence. And, you know, and let's not forget about Pete Hegseth. I played that soundbite yesterday, Jim, where, you know, because he's trying to say now, I never said women shouldn't be involved in combat. So somebody found this. It was recorded. It was doing an interview. And he said women should absolutely not be in combat. How has that made us a better fighting force? Now he's telling people that he never, ever complained about gays in the military. But he wrote a book in 2024 called The War on Warriors. And he said that allowing gay people to serve openly in the U.S. military was part of a Marxist agenda that prioritized social justice over combat readiness. Because, you know, those gays can't fight, Jim. Those women can't fight. Those gays can't fight. Only the beefy white men like Hegseth can fight.
Yeah, but Tony, this is the propaganda of 2025, Project 2025, and how they think. What's the big picture with these people? They really think they're going to get gay people out of the military who serve valiantly?
Well, no. Now Pete Hegseth is saying he doesn't. He never said that. Yeah, it might be in his book, but it was misinterpreted. It was, you know, the usual. It was like I didn't say it. You're making it up. Oh, it was a joke. I mean, come on, it's the whole Donald Trump playbook. I didn't say it. I didn't do it. I wasn't there.
Right,
maybe I was there, but it was a joke. You took it wrong. It was tongue in cheek.
Right. Well, that's what we're going to get 4 years of that. And our media is going to be like, oh, well, did he really say that? Or was it fake news? Was it real news? Or was it fake news?
Well, here's what I'm wondering, Jim. Remember last time during the Trump administration, the Washington Post started keeping track of the number of lies he told? And by the time his administration was over, they were over 30,000. Now that Jeff Bezos is kissing Trump's butt, I wonder if the Washington Post will be allowed to do that. Because, Jeff Bezos, as well as Mark Zuckerberg, they've both donated $1 million to the Trump inauguration. Oh, please, Mr. Trump, like me, buy my rockets, not Elon's rockets.
I know. 4 years of this snow job, it's like an avalanche, Joan. It's like we're buried in an avalanche somewhere in Switzerland. My skis are missing. Anyway, Joan, you have a great weekend and a restful weekend. I hope you rest up for the week. Thank you, Joan.
Thank you so much, Jim. One thing that I want to share with you, we've got a bunch of other callers. I promise you I'm going to work through the list. But Patty Vasquez did an interview earlier in the week, it might have been Tuesday, with a woman by the name of Barbara F. Walters. And she wrote a book called How Civil Wars Start and How to Stop Them. She's a professor of international affairs at the School of Global Policy and Strategy at UC San Diego. And I don't know if you heard it. We do podcasts now. We don't put our shows up on SoundCloud. We do podcasts wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, whatever, Apple Podcasts. And you can go to like Patty Vasquez full episodes, Joan Esposito full episodes, or you can do Patty Vasquez featured interviews, Joan Esposito featured interviews. If you did not hear this interview, and like I said, I'm pretty sure it was Tuesday. Yes, it was Tuesday. Confirmed that. It was so good. Go to the Patty Vasquez Special Episodes podcast and look for that date. Let's see, Tuesday would have been December 10th. And find her interview with Barbara F. Walter, not Walters, Walter, about this, how civil wars start and how to stop them. Because she talked about how democracies die. And here's one brief clip from the interview. I just want to share this with you. Lady B, go ahead and play that now.
One of the things that's really interesting is that in the 20th century, the way democracies died was usually through military coups. The military, who obviously in most countries is quite powerful, they decide, well, we don't want to have civilians telling us what to do. We're just going to take power ourselves. And so they'd have a coup and they put themselves in power. The 21st century is quite different. And Viktor Orban has kind of written the playbook of how you can do a non-military, non-violent, and legal coup in democracies where you get yourself elected. Oftentimes these individuals who, we'll call them strongmen, individuals who run for election in democracies are often quite popular. They win elections, and then once they get in power, they slowly and systematically begin to unravel the guardrails of democracy. And before citizens know it, suddenly they're like, oh, geez, we've lost a fair amount of rights, and we've lost some freedoms, and, geez, the press isn't free anymore, and opposition leaders keep disappearing, and the judicial system has been weaponized. And by the time citizens realize, they often don't have the power to reverse it. And Trump clearly has been enamored with Viktor Orban. He has met with him. We suspect that he's kind of, talking about various things having to do with power and democracy. And some of the things that Trump has said he's going to do when he comes into the White House are kind of straight out of Orban's playbook.
And that should be no surprise to anybody. And that is why Trump is saying things like, he used to say that the people at MSNBC, that they should be charged with treason. And you think it's a coincidence that the New York Times, in this last election cycle, never framed this election as democracy versus the fall of democracy? No, it was like they're the ones, I think, that led us to coin the term sane washing. It can happen here. It really can happen here. I read a book about totalitarian regimes. And one of the things that struck me ties perfectly to what Barbara Walters said. And there was this interview with this woman. I can't remember which country. And she said, this was after the fact, I just woke up one day and I looked out the living room window and there were tanks in the streets. Like, how did this happen? It doesn't hit like a tsunami, everything all at once. It's the death of 1,000 cuts. That's how it happens. Let's go back to the phone lines. Our good friend Bobby is on the line from Indiana. Bobby, hey, there's something that I wanted to talk to you about. Last time we talked, you were kind of down in the dumps and talking about how you weren't sure you were going to have enough money and your rent was going to increase. I want you to know that I got texts from people wanting to know how they could help you. There are people who really love you.
Well, they don't have to worry because years ago I covered my funeral expenses.
Oh God!
I'm all set. Hey, did you ever hear that stupid song? And this is the time of year when they get all their stupid songs out. Baby's First Christmas.
That title sounds familiar, but I couldn't sing it if you asked me to.
Yeah, well, I reworked it a little bit, just slightly, and this is going to be Bobby's Last Christmas.
Oh God!
I got a pretty good feeling with the kind of people that Crap Whistle is bringing to us in the White House. But boy, that was eerie. Did you hear about Pelosi today?
Yes. Nancy Pelosi, for those of you who haven't heard, she's in a hospital in Luxembourg. She was part of a congressional delegation, and I don't know whether she had a fall or, but she's in the hospital. What, for observation? Is it, Bobby?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you know what? You know why she was there?
No. I just know it was part of a congressional delegation.
A commemoration of the Battle of the Bulge in World War II.
Mm.
I wonder if
yes,
I wonder if her families got the telegram about it that we did.
It says the Washington Post said that she was there for the 80th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge, and she suffered an injury during an official engagement, and was admitted to the hospital for evaluation, and supposedly is working from her hospital bed. So
my grandmother got the telegram December 7, 1944. Regret to inform you that your son was injured in action in Luxembourg. That's a nice Christmas present, isn't it?
Oh, my.
So, yep, that was my pop that was over there. But I just thought there was an eerie connection, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, really. Bobby, I probably shouldn't have taken your call because we're up against a break, and I'm late getting to it. But I want to hear, when you get that song recorded, you send it to me, and we'll play it on the air. Bobby's Last Christmas.
Yeah.
Ready? We're ready.
People are gonna love to hear my voice.
What the heck?
Talk to you later.
See you, Bobby. We're going to take a break. We're going to be back with more calls and more news of the day right after this.
Podcasts of Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, YouTube, and Amazon. Just search for Joan Esposito.
Hi, this is Patty Vasquez, and I'm thrilled to announce that Driving It Home with Patty Vasquez now has its very own podcast that you can subscribe to. Actually, 2 Driving It Home full episodes and Driving It Home featured interviews. You can subscribe to one or both. Just search for Driving It Home wherever you get your podcasts, or get the podcast links on my show page by visiting heartlandsignal.com and clicking on my picture.
Patty Vasquez, weeknights 5 to 7 on WCPT 820.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito. Join the conversation now at 773-763-9278.
I'm trying to use the phone!
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
It is Friday. We spend the first half of the show on Friday with the phone lines open, taking your calls. And I do want you to know that at 3:30, Spencer Critchley is going to join us, and he is writing a new book that he has decided to publish chapter by chapter. We are going to, I think he's got 2 chapters done, but he definitely has 1. We're going to talk about that. And if after he's explained his writing, if you have a question or a comment, feel free to give us a call then, too. You just heard the number, but let me repeat it, 773-763-9278. Our good friend Steve from the Gold Coast is on the line. Hello, Steve. How are you today?
Well, I wanted to echo pretty much what you have said. I mean, as Americans, we have terrible memories. Those of us old enough to remember the 1970s and 80s, remember stagflation. We remember inflation such that, if you went to buy a home in the 1980s, you might be paying 12, 15, 17% for a 30-year mortgage. So, and then what happened was, beginning in the 90s, we saw this period, really of about 25, 30 years in which we had very low inflation, and things were cheap, and Americans just got used to it, because things were relatively stable. The Cold War had ended. International trade had made it possible to buy things that were being produced around the world very cheaply, and again, we've grown accustomed to this. And then along came COVID. That broke down because obviously the global supply chain issues, and Americans all of a sudden, oh my God, things cost a lot more, and as you pointed out, companies got, used to the notion that, well, hey, this is built in. They've been telling American consumers that, their supply chain issues. So guess what? If things cost $1.20, they used to cost 99 cents. They cost now $1.20. Let's just add on another 10, 15 cents. It's already built in. They believe that they're sky high. So why don't we just add on a little bit for ourselves? Except it wasn't a little bit. It was quite a lot. And so Donald Trump comes along and says, oh, my God, you're paying a lot more for a cheeseburger in 2024 than you were in 2020. Yeah, okay, and what's the point? I mean, you can't impact that in any significant way, Mr. Trump. But no, I'm going to. I promise. You're going to be amazed at how quickly prices will drop and how cheap gas is going to be. Not surprisingly.
Surprise.
He's been the president-elect. Yeah, he's going to, he may have actually sat down with a few people.
Well, Steve, it's hard to bring down prices when they're high. I'm not sure that I'll be able to bring grocery store prices down because, that's hard. And apparently I can't do hard things even though I told you I could.
Yeah, because, yes, you're the party of the free market. And that means that by its very nature, that limits your capacity to impact what the free market wants to charge people. So, and we've got a smaller and smaller number of companies that are producing everything for us because of mergers and acquisitions and so forth. So guess what? I mean, it's like traveling today. You've got X number of airlines, and that's it. I mean, it's not as if there's 20 airlines out there, and pretty much everybody knows what everybody else is charging, and you're going to have to pay or decide to take a bus or drive. And the same thing is true of everything else. And now Donald Trump may have sat down with somebody who actually has some sense or knowledge of this and said, hey, you know what, all those crazy things you said, you may have to backtrack on some of that because we really don't have the ability to do much of what you're talking about. And we certainly don't have the capacity to roll back prices. We can try and stem the increase. That's what it means to bring inflation under control, to bring it to about 2%, which is where the Fed would like it to be ideally. But if it's below that, you actually have a slowdown in the economy, and that's not what you want. That's deflationary. So, Donald, this idea that you were going to go back to paying what you were paying in 2020 for anything, no, that would mean we were on a steep economic decline if that would actually happen. So obviously, he's got to now try and roll back what he said because expectations.
I have a question for you, Steve. When the grocery store prices don't come down, and he's already said basically they're not going to, do you think that people will be disgusted with him, or will the people who voted for him make excuses for him?
I think it's going to be both. You've got the committed MAGA crazies, and they will figure out a way as to how we can blame the deep state. All those people are conspiring to undermine Donald Trump's efforts because if they would have just been dealt with, then, he could have really accomplished all of this. Obviously, the whole flat earth sort of conspiracy nonsense that obviously we can't know that the earth is flat because there's a giant conspiracy to cover it up. And so no matter what evidence we present to people, oh, no, that's part of the cover-up. So, I mean, that's their logic. Now, there will be a group of people who will say, oh, well, you know what? Didn't get what I expected, just in the same way that they did in 2020. So, in 2016, Hillary Clinton, to her credit, did not go to coal country and say, hey, look, I'm going to bring back 50, 100,000 jobs. You can go back to doing what your grandfathers did. No, she was honest. There are jobs that are simply gone by the wayside.
Yeah, and she even when she was in coal country, I remember she said, these jobs, guys, they're never coming back, but we can re-educate you. We can do solar panel factories. We can bring the green economy to your area so that you will be able to work in jobs that will be good for years to come. And somehow, I don't know, it didn't make an impression.
No, by the end of 2019, before COVID, there were tens of thousands of fewer of those jobs than when Donald Trump took office. Why? Because that's a natural evolution in the economy. Automation, it simply means that people aren't down there with picks and shovels anymore. Machines are doing those jobs. But again, you can lie to people. You can tell them what they want to hear, and they will vote for you, versus what, a lot of us do who are informed. We say to people, what, this is the truth. But Donald Trump has demonstrated that, lying to people is perhaps more politically advantageous and it's effective. And, so perhaps,
unless you expect to be held to account for those lies, which he clearly does not.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm still of the opinion that there are a few sane people in the Republican Party who are saying to themselves, look, we need to look beyond Donald Trump and where we're going to be once he's done and has all this behind us. And, Donald Trump, assuming that he behaves somewhat rationally, actually leaves office in 4 years, then where is the Republican Party? Because they're a party that is pretty much a cult, and there is nobody to take the place of Donald Trump. The MAGA will still exist, but who will lead MAGA? There's no one else who has that kind of following. And I think that there are Republicans who are saying, okay, what happens when that bus ride is over? It's kind of like, Elvis
well, exactly.
died.
That's what Ron DeSantis thought, that he could be the heir apparent to the MAGA world. But he learned the hard way that MAGA really is, I think, Trump dependent. Once the cult leader is gone, I don't think that I don't care how MAGA a position you take. I don't think J.D. Vance, I don't think Ron DeSantis, I don't think anybody is going to have that same kind of power.
Absolutely. And the things that they ran on, so it was going to be, immigration. And immigration has pretty much fallen to normal levels now, undocumented and otherwise. So that's no longer the case. That's the kind of issue that they wanted to lay out, on the economy. Well, okay, now the economy's in your hands. And you're saying to the American people, guess what? The things I promised, looks like I'm not going to be able to deliver on that so much. So those things that they ran on and won on, okay, fine. Now it's up to you to do something about them.
Yeah, I don't think that they have the infrastructure in place. I know for a fact that they don't. I've spoken to people who research immigration issues, and they will tell you it will take years to develop the kind of infrastructure necessary to actually move people out of this country. And the other thing is that the people who benefit from cheap labor in all sorts of sectors. I mean, you think about the hospitality industry, restaurants, hotels, construction, agriculture. I mean, I can go down a long list of people who do those jobs, and they are not native-born Americans. And so when you start talking about deporting them, what does that do to that donor base who are largely Republican, who have given and who are, are concerned about, hey, look, I need people to clean rooms in my hotel. I need people to work as busboys.
The hotel industry, the farm industry, the restaurant industry. We rely on immigrants to take some of those really difficult, low-paying jobs.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not so much that, the people like us who are saying, it would be wrong to separate families, this is unjust, blah, blah, blah. Okay, it's a lot of people who, it's going to affect their bottom line. They're going to be lined up to say, hey, look, Mr. Trump, you need to slow down. States like Texas cannot function. I used to do a lot of business down there. The people who do the day-to-day jobs down there, Texas just sort of, they're a red state, but they kind of look the other way and say, hey, look, they live over there. They show up to work. We don't ask too many questions, and then we go on screaming and yelling about how we hate illegal immigration. But it's just ridiculous. They all know exactly who is and who isn't here legally. They could impose all sorts of standards. They could make sure you could identify people. If you can't get a job, it would be a criminal act to hire somebody. You could impose harsh penalties. But nobody does that in Texas. Why? Because it wouldn't function as a state without those individuals.
Steve, thank you for the phone call. Always have an interesting conversation with you. Really, really appreciate your participation.
Take care, Joe.
You too, Steve. Have a great weekend. We have other callers, but we need to take a quick break. Let's get to that now, and we'll be right back with more.
Get social with WCPT 820 and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at WCPT 820.
This is WCPT 820, where facts matter.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
It is Friday. We spend the first half of our show on Friday taking your calls, 773-763-9278. Let's go to Crystal Lake. Michael is on the line. Hello, Michael. How are you?
Hi, thank you so much for taking my call.
Thanks for the call.
Yeah, I do love listening to you. It's something I've been wondering about for quite a while. With all the misinformation and disinformation on social media, you can't expect the social media owners to police it because, after all, they say it's free speech. But why don't we look at strengthening the slander and libel laws? If somebody goes on Facebook and says something that Hillary Clinton is a pedophile, then they should be held responsible. And I don't understand. I'm not a lawyer, but it seems to me if people were held responsible and liable for disinformation that hurts people, then they should be held responsible.
Well, that would be one way to approach it. I don't understand, though, Michael, why they can't tweak their algorithms. I mean, it doesn't seem like it should be out of the realm of possibility to try to tweak an algorithm so that hate speech is identified. I just think that there are a bunch of really smart coders out there. Somebody's got to be able to figure out a way to monitor this, or maybe they set some kind of, maybe they allow us to set some kind of almost like parental controls, certain keywords that we don't want to see any posts that, like have certain phrases in them, like, the great replacement, Jews will not replace us kind of a thing.
Right, but I think the issue is that they just start screaming about their constitutional right to free speech. And that goes on and on. Whereas if if I print something in the newspaper that's absolutely false and hateful and harm somebody, then I am liable. But it seems to be online. You can say anything you want. And I just don't think that that's an interesting approach to it. One of the things that I think would also help, I don't think that people should be allowed to be anonymous on the interwebs, whether it's a social media post or a comment, or even, like, say, on our WCPT text line. I think people should have to give their real name and they should have to have their identity verified. And I think that would go a long way, because if you know that, if Joan Esposito knows that her name is going to be associated with this post, she's going to think twice about what she writes, and she's going to think twice about being vicious or cruel or using bad words. No question about it. That's a great idea. But what we're both of our ideas are saying, let's take the responsibility of cleaning this up out of the hands of the people who own these the social media platforms and hold them liable, make them responsible for it. Free speech all you want, but if you say something bad, you might get sued for $750 million.
That works for me. Yeah.
Works for me, too, because we can't count on these people to do anything that's right as opposed to what's ever right for their well-being and their business.
Yeah. Accountability. So, we need accountability somehow,
Works for me.
Yeah, thanks, Michael, and thanks so much for the call. Let's go back to the phone lines. Our good friend Dave is on the line from Hoffman Estates. Hey, Dave.
Hey, Joan. Couple of things. Remember, about a week and a half ago, I told you I sent a thing to our local paper, the Daily Herald, about still ain't showed it.
Oh.
That yellow press, anyway. That paper kind of reminds me of the stuff that my grandpa used to use in the old outhouse.
Put it in the bottom of the bird cage kind of thing?
That too. I mean, they've gotten thinner and thinner. There's a reason for it. But, it's been, since the first of the month that I sent that off on the email to them. And it doesn't surprise me. I don't know if they got certain, if they get mad because one time I had something kind of disparaging about Trump one time. And
I don't know. Yeah.
On other thing, did you see who Vice President-elect J.D. Vance is taking to that Army-Navy game tomorrow?
No, I did not.
Daniel Penny.
Oh, yes. The former Marine who choked a black man on the public transportation in New York, and the guy had mental problems and was described as being threatening, and Daniel Penny put him in a chokehold to the point where the guy died, and he was just basically the charges against him, a jury wouldn't convict him. They were thinking about maybe convicting him, trying to go after him for the lesser charges, but it didn't look like manslaughter of any sort was going to be able to stick. So, and, I wasn't there. I didn't see it. It just seems to me that if you've got somebody in a chokehold and they pass out, you could ease up at that point. They're not a threat anymore if they're unconscious.
Yeah. Like you say, I wasn't there either, but it's a bad look, tone deaf, for these people. And then also, Trump is going to have Pete Hegseth as along with him, and also take Ron DeSantis as a fallback option too. If Hegseth doesn't make it in, but they're going to be at that game with Trump.
I'm sorry, just ick. It'll be really interesting because I did hear Ron DeSantis' name floated as a possible replacement for Hegseth, but there's Susie Wiles, who ran Trump's presidential campaign and is now his chief of staff, which is a very powerful gatekeeping position. Ron DeSantis and she hate one another. He tried to ruin her career. She was a big Republican campaign person, got hired to run a lot of different campaigns, and she was working with Ron DeSantis, and they had some kind of a falling out. I've never gotten the full details of what happened, but not only did Ron DeSantis stop working with her, I guess he fired her, he apparently tried to make sure she didn't get any work from anybody else. The story that I saw said he tried to ruin her career. He tried to get other people to never consider hiring her. So there is some serious bad blood there.
Wow. Yeah, and like you were talking about with Trump when he's saying he's not going to get the food down now like he promised.
It's hard.
That it's hard. You know who used to say that? Remember when George W. Bush was hard work? Remember how he went? Yeah, I'll have to ask my sister and brother-in-law if they happen to get a glimpse of him because they're going to that game because their step-grandson is at the Naval Academy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so they're planning to go, weather, permitting that they can fly in. But and lastly, where's Vice President Kamala Harris been?
I was just talking about that. She made one brief appearance at a Native American thing, but she is, I got her schedule, and she is making an appearance in front of some youth group. I don't know whether it's to encourage youth to get involved in politics or just activism, but it was announced that she's going to be making a speech to that group. And I think it is. I think it's next week. One of my friends told me when I was complaining about her absence that she was scheduled to make some big speech on Tuesday of next week. But I don't know if it's the same youth group or if it's something else. I have to look into that a little bit more. But both she and Joe Biden have just gone radio silent.
Yeah, it's like somebody, I think earlier this morning, one of the stations on the TV, I don't know if it's the CNN or MSNBC, but they said that, like with the vice president's schedule, saying that whatever, be behind closed doors type of thing, no press or whatever, just kind of gone to be a phantom again. And like you said about President Biden, I mean, in essence, it's almost like a rudderless ship already, that he's just kind of marking time, till the end.
It does feel that way. It does feel like he's just not out there anymore. I know that once Kamala got the nod, even though he said nobody was going to campaign harder for him, he did some campaigning, but it wasn't like, he was out there a lot. And I don't know. It's totally bizarre, but I get the feeling that they've both just checked out.
Yeah, definitely. Just like, punching the clock and then punching it out. And then, but I understand she's talking about wanting to run again in 2028.
Yeah, good luck with that.
You'd feel more
if that's really what she wants to do, Dave, she needs to be out every day making a speech in front of some significant group right here, right now. Because it's the impression, I don't even know what Republicans, how they feel, but I've been seeing a lot of comments from Democrats like, okay, so you lost the election. It happens. It doesn't mean you just tuck your tail between your legs and hide in the closet. You get back out there. You keep fighting.
Right.
I don't know.
Show be around the White House if possible. Show some face time.
Exactly.
I mean, like a show of strength.
Exactly.
It's not like this phantom right now. And but I've always even said I've leaned towards. I would like to see Wes Moore go in 28 myself, but
Wes Moore.
I like him. Yeah, the governor of Maryland.
Oh.
He's good. He's the one. He's a veteran, Rhodes Scholar, veteran, all of it, and that. And he got that bridge, he got that thing getting completed, worked on. They thought it was going to be 11 months, and he got it done, in not totally done, but they got it cleared up so they could get the ships and all of that stuff out, in that harbor after that bridge collapsed that time.
Yeah.
He's a doer. That guy. And anyway, but yeah, I just thought I'd vent that with you about Vice President Harris. I mean, if you want to earn a vote, make some FaceTime.
Yeah, get out there.
Show that. Because she said if she was the president, she was going to be, there for us and stuff like that. Well.
Yep. I know.
Even Trump, that fool, he'd show his face on anything,
Yeah, really. And sell something in the process. Yeah. Dave, I gotta get to the news.
Happy Friday the 13th, by the way.
Yes, indeed. But you know what? The 13th is a very lucky day for me, and so I will share that luck with you.
Okay, good. Be well and have a good weekend.
You too. We are going to take a break for news. We are going to get back to the phone lines right after this.
You're the only voice of reason on the radio.
You give me hope.
Having listened to you every day.
Thank you for your clear insight.
Always felt a little bit smarter.
I listen to you every single day. I keep coming back to this station, and thank you for what you do.
On WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
You're listening to WCPT 820, because facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive.
The reason that I listen to you from the infamous other side, you will call a spade, and if it's indefensible, you will not defend it. And you know what? I can respect that.
On WCPT 820.
It's Friday. It's Friday the 13th, but that's okay. That's a lucky day. I'm extending my Friday the 13th luck to you. Hope you have great weekend plans. We are doing what we do every Friday, spending the first half of the show taking your calls, talking to you about the news and the issues of the day. So let's get right back to it. Our good friend Ron from Chicago is on the line. Hey, Ron, how are you?
Oh, pretty good. A couple of birthdays today. Taylor Swift is 35, and I don't know why she wasn't named the Time Magazine Person of the Year instead of Donald Trump. She did a lot more this year than he did.
Who did you say?
Taylor Swift.
Oh, Taylor Swift. I thought you said Tara. Yes,
no,
yes.
Taylor.
And Dick Van Dyke has just 99. This week turned 99.
Yeah, today is 99, right? And the FBI was first blamed for the January 6th rioting, and that was proven false. And now they're being blamed for not doing enough. So, they...
Big shock. Yeah, Donald Trump is not a fan of the FBI, at least not an FBI that isn't under his thumb. Now, that'll be an FBI under his thumb. That'll be a great FBI.
Oh, yeah. And also one more thing, that back in the 1930s, people were out in a street corner selling apples for a nickel. So in a couple months, will people be standing on the street corner selling apples for $5 each?
Yeah, really. Let's hope it doesn't get that bad. But there are some people who are worried that Donald Trump could wreck the economy to the point where we do experience a recession and maybe even a depression.
Yeah, what do they call it? Hyperinflation?
Yeah, they'll give it some fancy name, but it's just basically going to mean that not only can he not bring grocery store prices down, he's going to make everything more expensive.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Appreciate the call. Let's go back to the phone lines. Our good friend Roosevelt is on the line. Hey, Roosevelt, how are you?
Oh, thank you for taking my call.
Thank you for calling.
Feliz Navidad, whatever. Hey, you know what? I got a couple of questions for you. You mentioned, I'm not sure it was yesterday, the day before yesterday, that you had bought a house in Mexico. Do you mind
years ago, yeah. Many years ago, I had a house in Mexico.
Well, on the subject, I have two questions, if you don't mind answering them. But if you do,
go ahead.
Where did you buy the house, and how long did you hold it? In other words, how long did you have it?
When my mom was still alive, I can't remember what birthday it was. It was like, I don't know, maybe she was 65 or something. we wanted to do, it was a milestone birthday, and we wanted to do something special. This was when I was still working at Channel 5, and there was a Mexican-American guy who worked at Channel 5, and he had bought a house to use as a rental property for tourists. He had bought a house in Huatulco. Huatulco is now, actually, there's a couple of resorts there now. At the time, there was nothing. And it's a town, for those of you who haven't heard of it, it's on the west coast, and it's almost all the way down to Guatemala. I mean, it's very, very, very southern, to the point where there's no seasons. It's just wet season and dry season, very tropical. And so to celebrate my mom's birthday, I rented his house for a week. And when I was down there, I just fell in love with the place. I just can't tell you. It just spoke to me in so many ways. And that's where I ended up in Huatulco. That's where I ended getting up a place of my own.
Would it be La Crucita, which means the little cross? You remember? Because that's, like you said, it's a remote. Huatulco, hardly anybody knows about it. But I'm sure there's
well, at the time I went down there, the president of Mexico was, I can't remember his first name, President Fox. And you know how, there are certain parts of Mexico that are very tourist friendly. He decided that the Mexican government, that the next big tourist destination was going to be Huatulco. So he had a house built there. The people who owned Cerveza, Corona, the Corona beer, that family had a house there, and he had designated the government to support development in Huatulco. Unfortunately, he lost the very next election, and the new president coming in didn't care about Huatulco, so development really slowed down and kind of stopped for quite a while.
Yeah. Well, there's other places that are kind of they're building. It depends on which president, like you said, is in office. Now, let me tell you why I called you. I called you because, would you believe, I know you're going to believe this, would you believe to this day the show that I listen to are still saying that it's the least of two evils, meaning the Democratic Party versus the Republican Party. However, there's good news, and that is there's a Democrat that now contributes to the show. And this guy kind of straightened the lady out because they keep on saying, reporter-in-chief. And this is what he said. This guy is like over 70. He's an activist. And he said a lot of the laws that were implemented prior to Obama, which when the two towers went down, affected the presidency and those particular deportations when Obama was there. And I told this lady for months in the past that it doesn't work that way. It's not like a guy comes in that says, I want $2.5 million, which I believe is what the amount that was deported in the two Obama administrations. And to be more specific, he said, what was it, the thing that became, remember when he mentioned Brownie, thanks a lot, Brownie, what was it, the organization that he created? To make us fear of being attacked again, him and Cheney cooked up. What was that? Do you remember? Was that FEMA or was it, what's the other one? Do you remember the time? Remember also, I mentioned this before. Remember the colors? Were you supposed to be aware that we might get be attacked? Remember the different colors? There's the different colors. They would have signs on the side of the road saying, well, this is this color, and so be aware we might be attacked. So, but I'm kind of deviating from what I wanted to say. So, in other words, a lot of, remember the Patriot Act? That's one of the things that was affected. So they had us scared, and that's why Bush was reelected. Remember Cheney? If you don't elect us, we're going to be attacked for sure with the next guy. That's one of the reasons why he was reelected. So all these things were affected by that. But this guy that I mentioned before, he's a Democrat, and this guy's very knowledgeable. And he said that now, to your point, the prices of things are going to be going up because that was today was reported on that Spanish station that indeed Trump said that it's very difficult to maintain the prices low. But to this day, they're still saying this garbage. There's a guy that goes to Guadalajara, Mexico, every year. This guy is a teacher. He came here in his early 20s, and he spent all the winter out there. And this guy calls up all the way from Guadalajara, and when the elections were, he goes, both parties are the same. He goes, that's why I didn't vote. This is a teacher that teaches high schoolers here. So, to me, I called up one day. I go, he shouldn't be contributing to the show because he didn't put nothing in it, or he didn't take, by saying that he didn't vote. And this guy constantly would say, and to this day he still says, both parties are the same. That both parties are in cahoots.
Yeah, but I don't know what to do with that, Roosevelt. I really don't, because I think the Republican and the Democratic Party literally could not be more different. There have been times in the past where there was a lot of overlap in ideas and goals, but now it is. I don't understand how people can say that. And I also don't understand this, well, the Republicans may not be great, but the Democrats, they're the devil. They're the pedophiles. They're the blood-sucking corporate overlords. I don't know. I don't get that. I don't get it.
So I took him to task one time, and I said I could give you 10 examples of things that they've done for the middle class and the poor, and you won't be able to give me one example that they considered. I'm talking about the Republican Party in the past 40 years, and I gave them. I go, I even extended. I'll even give you another break. In the past 50 years, I go, Social Security, Democrat. Medicare, Democrat.
Oh, my favorite was the person who said that they were going to vote for Donald Trump because he was suggesting that great program for first-time homebuyers to get a $25,000 credit, and the reporter was like, that was Kamala Harris. And they were like, what?
And that was
what?
the reporter. Yeah, you're right. That was the reporter. Mm-hmm. And that's just it. Wait till this guy gets in there. I'm talking about Trump. He's going to take credit for the infrastructure because that takes time.
Yeah, he's going to take credit for all the good things because, when a president gets policy passed, like the infrastructure bill, that doesn't start the next day. You have to gear up. You have to decide the projects. You have to fund them. They have to get out there and hire the people. It takes a year or two for this stuff to really come to fruition. So there's going to be a lot of good stuff that happens in at least the early years of the Trump administration, and he's going to take credit for it, and it's all going to have been stuff that Joe Biden did. Roosevelt, I got to get to a break. Thank you so much for the call. What?
And I say something real quick, briefly.
Real quick.
What reported was the president of Mexico was for that Time magazine. She was number 2, supposedly. That was reported today that she was in the running for being on the Person of the Year. And what do you know about the owner of Time magazine? I believe he's never criticized Trump, and he bought them out in 2018.
I don't know anything about who owns Time magazine now. I just know that it's a shadow of its former self. But Roosevelt, I got to go. We got to get to a break. We're going to have more calls and more news right after this.
Take Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive with you on the go by using the TuneIn app on your phone. Just search for WCPT 820.
Amy Goodman reports on the news stories rarely covered by the corporate media. Democracy Now!
The UN's Humanitarian Affairs Office warned Palestinian children are at high risk of injury or death from unexploded ordnance left after more than 13 months of Israeli attacks. 8-year-old Mohammed Karmash, this is his mother.
No one was there to tell him that these are explosives that the Israelis throw.
Democracy Now! Weekday evenings at 10 on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk. Alexa, play WCPT.
WCPT from TuneIn.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
It is Friday, and then, as you know, on Fridays, we spend the first half of the show taking your calls. At 3:30, I'm going to be joined by Spencer Critchley. We're going to talk about his new book. If you, after hearing what Spencer has to say, if you want to make a comment or have a question, we will keep the phone lines open during our next discussion. But right now, we're going to go to Glenview, where Steve is on the line. Hello, Steve.
Hello, Joan. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Well, good to talk with you again. I enjoy your show. One of the things that I've really been frustrated about since the election is that it's pretty well known and a high probability that this election was won basically by uneducated and uninformed voters, and it's heartbreaking. But the Republicans, the propaganda machine on social media just worked overtime with disinformation and propaganda, and it's something that we have to deal with. This 55% of us, of Americans get their information on social media, and it's pretty disconcerting. It's not. So it's like we don't have a level playing field anymore, and I know people have brought this up, but it's a huge issue, and
it absolutely is a huge issue, and we need to figure out a way to reach these folks. We really do, and it isn't. They're not following. They're not reading newspapers. They're not paying attention to quote unquote traditional media. And Democrats have to figure out how to reach these people, whether it's digital ads, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Instagram, whether it's TikTok, whether it's YouTube, where we got to figure out where those folks are, and we've got to get our message there, too. The Democratic Party hasn't been anywhere near as good at media as the Republicans have been.
Exactly. Well said. And frankly, we got work to do. We got a president who basically did some good things and failed to communicate them to the American people. And, they're keeping him in the closet for 2 years while, he had some mental issues. We get that. That they should have maybe elevated Kamala sooner. But, yeah, we have to change the leadership and really get with it here in terms of our communication and messaging. And yeah, I mean, it may be the
Steve,
biggest
where do you normally get your news? What is your main source of information, or your top three?
Well, I do read magazines, and I get Apple News in the morning, and they give you kind of what you're interested in. It's the old algorithms thing. I mean, I don't watch a lot of TV news anymore. But yeah, again, you're right that people don't use the traditional means, and that's kind of I'm fairly old school, but I don't use social media a lot, to be honest. I'm not on Facebook. I don't do Instagram or whatever. But if you're smart, you got to reach out to use different mediums to reach out to different people. And but it's scary how many people are getting their information off social media, and frankly, it's full of misinformation.
Well, that's the problem with getting information from social media. Everybody's equal. If you're if you're Rachel Maddow and you post something on social media, your comment gets as much attention as, Harriet Beaksmacker, who posts something on social media. There is you've got to trust, you've got to have trusted sources.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I have the answer, but we do need to figure out how to teach our younger generation how to discern fact from fiction, and it's not easy. but we have the ability to do it. We can use algorithms, as you mentioned earlier, to do that. The other thing I'll mention too, real quick, is the Trumpians have called this a mandate, and I would say that is completely false. Donald Trump does not have a mandate. He didn't even get 50% of the vote. He got 49 and change. Kamala got 48 and change. That is not a mandate, and so I hope we don't all just throw in the towel and give up, and we got to keep fighting.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Steve, thank you so much for the call. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Well, appreciate what you do, Joan. We'll catch up.
Yes, we will. Yes, thank you. The president was Vicente Fox, the president of Mexico, whose first name I couldn't remember. Thank you, texter. Thank you, Myrna, for texting that in. I think we have time. Yes, we definitely have time. This week, Governor Pritzker was talking about migrants and here in Illinois. I want to share this with you. It's not that it's anything, earth-shattering or anything you may have not thought about before, but he talks about the situation in the state of Illinois when it comes to migrants so clearly and straightforward. And this is what's going on. And this is the world we live in, and this is what I think about it. I'm going to be quiet now so we have time to get through this. Lady B, play Governor Pritzker, if you would.
We've got documented immigrants, people who are here legally, and they have documents that allow them to work or allow them to be here. They've been put in a position of fear by what the Trump administration has threatened. They have relatives who are undocumented, and these are often, the documented folks are often hardworking people following the law. In fact, almost all. And so I'm going to protect them. We have migrants who've come to the state since August of 2022, sent here, as you know, by the governor of Texas. Those folks are also legal to be in the United States. They are awaiting asylum hearings. And it's my obligation to protect them as well. Anybody that's here in this country that's, here and has documentation, is here legally, of course, I'm obligated to protect them just as I would anybody else, any citizen of the United States, law enforcement, the government, etc. The third group are people who are undocumented. And let me be clear up front. Violent criminals who are undocumented and convicted of violent crime should be deported. I do not want them in my state. I do not think they should be in the United States. But there are an awful lot of people who have lived here, and I think we run into them every day, who have lived here for a decade or 2 decades or more, who are undocumented still, for a variety of reasons. By the way, often they've tried very hard to become documented, to use the levers that are available to them. But they're here and they're holding down jobs. And they're paying taxes that they don't get any benefit from. And I believe it's my obligation to protect them, too. Those are residents of the state of Illinois. Now, I know that you want to, ask the question about, the clash that might exist. But to be clear, we have laws on the books in the state of Illinois. I'm proud of those laws that protect people who are undocumented here. That, by the way, protect those who are migrants and those who are documented immigrants, too. But we have laws that protect undocumented immigrants, and I'm going to make sure to follow the law. I'm concerned that the Trump administration and, his lackeys aren't going to follow the law. But I will.
Voice of reason. Man, we're so lucky to have him as our governor. We're going to take a break. We're going to be back with Spencer Critchley after this.
There's no excuse to miss Joan Esposito.
It's number one on my stereo.
Live, local, and progressive. You can listen to her daily at WCPT820.com on your computer or phone.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Spencer Critchley is author of one of the books that if you haven't read it, you should be reading it, Patriots of Two Nations. And he hosts a podcast, Dastardly Cleverness in the Service of Good. Spencer is here to talk in part about his new book. Spencer, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay, Joan. How are you doing?
I'm doing remarkably well for someone who is still suffering from brain fog and still has a little bit of a scritchy throat from my fifth bout with COVID, but I have emerged triumphant yet again. COVID will not take me down.
Good for you. I didn't realize it was 5 times.
Yes.
Holy smoke.
You'd think I'd be getting good at it by now.
Well, and so much for just letting people catch it and develop immunity, right?
Yeah. I'm my own herd.
Yeah. But man.
Yeah. It was not the way I intended to spend Thanksgiving week, Spencer. And what bothered me even more is I took the week off, I took vacation, and then I spent the whole week sick in bed. I was like, can I get a do-over, please?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But, that which does not kill me makes me strong. And I've discovered that's a lie. That which does not kill me makes me weaker.
It makes me sick, at least.
Yes. Anyway, I was telling the audience about your idea that for your next book, rather than waiting until it's all done and releasing it that way, that you were going to release it chapter by chapter. Talk about your decision to do that first.
Right. Yeah. Well, when Trump was elected again, I was still in the middle of working on a bigger book, which I've been working on for several years. And at the back of my mind was this smaller book which I had the working title of The Liberal Backbone for. And when Trump won again, I thought, oh, hell, I just got to get the smaller book out. I've got to do something, if only for my own sanity. And I thought, let me just do this smaller book because I think it's very relevant to what's happening right now. And if I can do anything to help in any way, let me do this. And as I say, it'll also help with my own sanity.
Yeah.
And I thought, let me try what Charles Dickens did with the Pickwick Papers at the risk of, being so impertinent as to compare myself to Charles Dickens. But he released it chapter by chapter in a newspaper. And then it was collected as the published book later on. And I thought that feels like a way to go, and I can invite people to comment on these will be first drafts of each chapter, and I will just, post them as I get them, and I'll do that quickly. So far, it's been one a week. I don't know if I can keep that pace up.
Where are you posting them? Where can people get this to read?
Sure. Well, I'm on Substack now, so you can.
What's the name of your Substack? Obviously, we can find it with your name, but did you give it a name?
No, for now it's just me. So I'm at substack.com at Spencer Critchley. And I suppose I should check that. Did I give it a name? Because I may have called it Dastardly Cleverness in the Service of Good now that I think about it. Because you can also find it at the Dastardly Cleverness in the Service of Good website, which is dastardlycleverness.com. And they're also being posted as podcast episodes on the Dastardly Cleverness in the Service of Good podcast, which, of course, you can listen to with any podcast app. So, and if you get on my email list, I'm actually emailing out each chapter in full to the email list. Something like Heather Cox Richardson does with Letters from an American. She just sends out a long opinion piece very frequently. So the same thing. I want people to have access to this if they're interested and have the whole chapter. As I say, it's the first draft of each chapter. These will no doubt change as I put the final book together. But I'm encouraging people, if they have any comments or suggestions or corrections, if they see that I've gotten a fact wrong, I hope they'll get in touch.
Well, let's talk. Do we have? Should we? No. Yeah, we've got time. Let's talk about the first chapter. Are you still calling it The Liberal Backbone? I know you said that was a working title.
Yeah. So the whole book is called The Liberal Backbone. So that's the working title.
What? Let's start with the first chapter. Give us an idea of what that's about.
So that's introducing the concept, and I will, while I'm talking to you, I'll get it up in front of me, so to make sure I'm getting my own work right. And the idea of the liberal backbone is that I think liberals have become, by and large, confused about what they actually stand for, because it's a strength and a weakness of liberalism that it's so tolerant and inclusive. That's the great thing about it, that liberalism makes very few demands on you as to what you believe. And in particular, it doesn't make any demands that you believe in any particular moral ideology. So you can be religious, belong to any religion. You can be atheistic. You can be conservative. You can be progressive. You can be a lot of different things and still be a liberal. And liberalism will welcome you into the society with very few limits, except, if you try to tear that society down, if you try to behave in ways that contravene the basic commitments of liberalism, like commitments to nonviolent resolution of disputes and commitments against the destruction of liberalism itself and replacing it with authoritarianism, for example. Just to name a topical example. But so that's great about liberalism, that it's so inclusive and so open to ideas, at least in its ideal case, when it's actually being implemented the way it should be. But it's also a tremendous vulnerability, and liberal democracies often fail because they make themselves so vulnerable to attack. And very often when a democracy fails, a demagogue, like a Trump-like figure, is actually popularly elected in a legitimate election and then sets about destroying the democracy. And that's happened repeatedly throughout history. It's actually what normally happens. So the point of the liberal backbone is liberals, while maintaining their commitment to tolerance, I think need to learn how to stand up for what they do stand for more effectively, because they have a reputation for standing for nothing. And as I say in the first chapter, I begin with, if you'd like, I could read a couple of sentences.
Yes,
just
please.
To give a sense of it.
Yeah.
So it says, the first chapter begins, what, if anything, do liberals stand for? It can be hard to tell, and it has been for a long time. Back in 1941, Robert Frost described a liberal as someone who never takes their own side in a quarrel. And it's true, and Frost was far from the first to notice. 2 decades earlier, Carl Schmitt had declared that if you asked liberals to choose between crucifying the Messiah or a bandit, their response would be a proposal to adjourn or appoint a commission of investigation. It's bad enough when you have to admit that a beloved poet and fellow liberal had a point. It's so much worse when it's a top Nazi lawyer, which is what Carl Schmitt was when he was speaking that way about liberals. And, I think you have to admit there's certain truth in what Carl Schmitt said. The liberals love to convene discussions, and form committees and debate with each other, potentially endlessly. And the question is often raised, as I ask it in the first line, is, what do liberals actually stand for? And if you ask liberals themselves often, you'll find they're kind of uncertain. And that's a very bad way to be at this moment politically. It's great, as I say, in terms of building an open society. But politically, it's extremely vulnerable. It makes you extremely vulnerable. And this is a time when liberals need to understand what are those core principles they actually do stand for, and be able to stand for them effectively, because, as I said, I think they've become confused and become ineffective at politics.
When you talk about these core principles, are you talking about what, liberal? What do you stand for? I stand for freedom. Is that what you're talking about? Because that's kind of an ultra broad word that, can mean different things in different scenarios. Or are you talking about something more specific?
No, that's a really great question, because really these are a few really a short list of 4 or 5 core principles that are the essence of liberalism going back to the 16 and 1700s with people like John Locke and Thomas Jefferson and others. But each of those principles, you need to understand what you mean by that. And freedom is a great choice. Liberalism, if nothing else, is a philosophy of freedom, hence the name liberal from Latin libertas. That was the idea that everybody should be free. But that right there is a core area of disagreement between liberals, the MAGA right, and what's often called the woke left. And the MAGA right is anti-liberal, meaning against this philosophy of liberalism. And the woke left that's associated with things like cancel culture and, in its extreme form, sort of thought policing kind of approach, that's actually descended from an anti-liberal version of the left that goes back at least to Karl Marx. Not that they're all Marxists, but it's he's one of the roots of it. And that's a core area of confusion for present-day liberals, because many liberals assume that there's only one version of the left and there's only one version of the right. And if you're woke, you're somewhere on the far progressive left, and that's the same thing. But in fact, there are at least two fundamentally different lefts. They disagree on fundamental principles.
Left and lefter? Or how do we...
No, they're not left. They're different. Think of two separate lines. So it's not a question of how far left you are.
Okay.
You can be a very far left liberal, a very progressive social democratic liberal, like a Bernie Sanders or an AOC, for example, and you're still a liberal. But if you're this version of the woke left I'm describing, which actually does not believe unreservedly in free speech, for example, that left is actually explicitly anti-liberal, and they say that themselves. They think liberalism is a big problem. They think it contributes to oppression. And that's a key area of confusion right now, because many, many people hear these ideas which are essentially anti-liberal and think they have to agree with them because they too are, on the progressive left, say. But they don't realize there's actually two incompatible versions of progressivism. And then you see the same thing on the right. People who we traditionally call conservatives are actually also believers in liberalism, the broad philosophy of freedom on which liberal democracy is based.
That's why I like, when we're talking about all these different positions, I like the image of a horseshoe rather than a spectrum, rather than a line, because it seems to me that you get to at least some on the far left and some on the very far right are closer in their feelings than the bottom of the horseshoe, which would be the more middle-of-the-road pragmatic people.
Well, the idea is the horseshoe kind of meets, and you get the extreme far left and extreme far right meet, where the horseshoe gets close together at the bottom, and that can be useful. One way they meet is they both become anarchists, coming at it from different directions. But what I'm saying is it's not even one line, whether it's bent or straight. Because if you think about, we typically think about left-right, the left-right spectrum of opinion. You're somewhere between the far left and the far right. And those are all of the possibilities. You're somewhere between far left, the middle, and the far right. Mm-hmm. What I'm saying is there are people who don't believe in that line at all. They're not on that line because they don't believe in it. That line represents liberal opinion from like a libertarian conservative, a very small government conservative on the right, to a very progressive Bernie-style liberal on the left. But I'm saying there are people on the left and the right who aren't on that line at all because they don't believe in liberalism. And so this is a key area of disagreement. And you asked about freedom. Liberals define freedom as individual freedom. So it's the right that every individual in the world has to be free of coercion and to think freely decide for themselves as long as they're not hurting anybody else, and to live in a society where they can govern themselves through democracy. So that's the liberal definition of freedom. But MAGA, for example, comes from a tradition that equates freedom with the liberation of a group, the nation, basically, the liberation of the nation from its oppression or corruption by foreign invaders or domestic saboteurs. So it's a more mystical kind of liberation. And if you listen to what MAGA people are saying, the really committed MAGA believers, they are talking about that kind of liberation, the liberation of a people, what they think of as real Americans, from all of these threats they think they're facing. And once they're liberated, they will come together as a strong community of people who share the same values and are united and strong and powerful and virtuous. That's a very different concept of freedom, and it often overrides individual freedom, because if you are not a member of that people because you don't have the right religion, for example, you don't have the right political beliefs, the right kinds of, extreme right-wing values, you are not free. You don't get the same rights to freedom because you're a threat. You're at least a foreigner and a corrupting influence on our culture, which must be protected. So you explicitly do not get the same rights to freedom. And then you find out that even the members of the group they're not really free. They believe they are because they believe they're a part of this great national spirit and mission. But they find out, of course, that they're totally expendable and will end up being exploited and oppressed, because what this is really about is whoever is in charge at the top. And on the left, the anti-liberal left also has a very different conception of freedom. They see liberal individual freedom as a state of being alienated from true human nature, which wants to be communitarian and cooperative and peaceful. And we've been fooled into thinking that we're individuals who need to make our own way separate from each other because it divides us and keeps us weak, and fools us into participating in this alienating, industrialized lifestyle where all we do is chase money and status and compete against each other, which only ends up serving the powerful, rich people who are in charge and who are selling us products and convincing us to work at low wages and all of this stuff. So those people think the concept of the liberal individual is actually an artifact of this much larger oppressive system that we live in. And when we wake up, this is part of the derivation of this sense of woke, is when we wake up and realize we're living within a giant illusion designed to keep us oppressed, we will break down the whole system, whether it's not necessarily in a violent revolution, but we'll take it apart, start over, and build a communitarian society where we will liberate our true natures, which want to be cooperative and maximally inclusive and nonviolent and all that sort of thing. So you can see how you can pick any of these definitions of freedom you want. As a liberal, I will say you are perfectly free to believe any of these things. I'm not saying you should not believe any of these things. But also as a liberal, you have to decide whether you believe that or not. And a lot of liberals have a hard time saying things like, I believe in individual freedom, and just saying that.
We need to take a break, but I want to, that's what I want. I want you to, you've talked about these core principles, but if we can't even decide on what we're talking about when we're talking about freedom, it seems to make articulating those core principles a little tricky. Maybe what you're saying is we have to be much more specific rather than using a generic word. But Spencer Critchley and I are going to take a real quick break. We're going to continue this discussion in just a minute.
Get social with WCPT 820 and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at WCPT 820.
Chicago's Progressive Talk, WCPT 820, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I'm joined by Spencer Critchley. You know him as the author of Patriots of Two Nations. He also does the podcast Dastardly Cleverness in the Service of Good. He has a new book that he is releasing chapter by chapter. You can search his name on Substack and find it. The website associated with Dastardly Cleverness has it. And pretty much wherever you can find Spencer Critchley, you can sign up to get chapters of this book. The book is called The Liberal Backbone. And we started this discussion by talking about, core principles. What are core principles? And I threw out the word freedom, which turned out to be a little more complicated than it might appear. But so you're saying, rather than just saying, I believe in freedom, I believe in individual freedom. More specific than that, though, Spencer? Does it need to be drilled down even further?
To do this, it's really more at about that level of just getting clear on what your core values actually are.
But if I say I'm a firm believer in individual freedom, I mean, that could be interpreted by some as being anti-government. We don't want the government telling us what to do. We all decide what we're going to do on our own whenever we want.
Yeah.
And so I do believe government has a role. I don't believe government belongs in the doctor's office, but I think government has a role in society. So how do I articulate that in my definition of freedom?
Right. Well, within the definition of freedom, you can get quite specific if you want to. I want to keep it as simple as possible because I know most people are not all that interested in ideology. And even if you are and you aren't prepared to devote a lot of time to it, you can quickly feel like you're getting lost in the weeds and find people arguing over exactly what liberalism means. But, for example, another core principle of liberalism is democratic self-government. So you could say, I believe in individual freedom, which, classically liberals would define that in simple terms as each of us should be free to think and do whatever we want as long as we're not infringing on other people's freedom and, not causing harm to other people. Would be a short version of the liberal definition of individual freedom. But another principle of liberalism is that you believe in democratic self-government. So you do also believe that there should be a government because the government is there to protect the freedom of everybody.
Right.
And it turns out that we can, liberals will freely agree to create a government, not only to protect our freedom through having, a military, for example, but providing services to people. So the government makes sure you have clean waters and the water and the food isn't poisonous. And you could easily decide we want to have good public schools. All of it subject to voting and debating to make sure that enough of us do agree with this stuff. And that starts to make people have positive freedoms, not just the negative freedom of freedom from being coerced or interfered with, but the positive freedom to grow up healthy, to grow up educated, and to be able to realize your desires, interests, and dreams as a vision of freedom, as positive freedom. So if you want to get into that level of detail, you can. But at a minimum, you can just say, I believe in the freedom of each individual to think and do whatever they want as long as they're not hurting anybody else. And that's a lot to decide that you actually believe in that. And then another principle of liberalism is you believe in democratic self-governance, and which, as I say, introduces, I'm not an anarchist, right?
Exactly.
I part company with anarchists. I don't believe if we destroyed the government that we would just self-organize and everything would be fine. So
I can't imagine that anybody can espouse that belief. I mean, have you paid attention to people? Do you see what people are like? Self-organized?
So, Joan, let me give you an example of how the confusion shows up in day-to-day life. Now, again, I am not saying people should not be allowed to be anarchists or part of the woke left or even MAGA, really, as long as they don't hurt anybody. I am saying, though, that if you believe in liberalism and want to defend it, want to politically defend it effectively, you do need to be able to stand up for what you believe in the great debate over where this country should go, right? If you aren't clear about what you stand for or aren't skilled at standing up for it, you'll get rolled over by all these other much more ideological, much more committed people. And so that's what I'm saying. And so the way this shows up in day-to-day life is anarchism, for example, becomes quite popular amongst liberals, like the Occupy Wall Street movement, for example, because that sounds like something liberals would believe in. Obviously, Wall Street has committed a ton of abuses and has a lot to answer for, rendering all those people homeless in the 2008 financial crisis, et cetera, right? And so a lot of liberals think, yeah, I'm down with Occupy Wall Street. Well, one of the co-founders of Occupy Wall Street was explicitly an anarchist, a very well, informed, thoughtful, smart person who was an anarchist. And a lot of the ideology that was driving Occupy Wall Street was anarchist ideology. And when you get people getting, for example, having a meeting and the whole point is we're going to decide everything with everybody involved by consensus, and people will be sitting there snapping their fingers throughout the meeting to indicate how they feel about, I support this idea. You may find that you're participating in an anarchist exercise here. Now, that in itself is not necessarily a bad thing. All you're doing is having an inclusive meeting and inviting everybody to contribute, right? But you can find yourself actually appearing to espouse an anarchist solution to the Wall Street problem when you don't. And then when your opponents on the right, as they will accuse you of being an anarchist. Now, if you are an anarchist, you should say, hell yes, I am. And I'm proud of it. Let's have an argument. Fine. But if you're a liberal, you're not an anarchist. And if you're not sure what the difference between a liberal and an anarchist is, or if you're behaving in ways that really look like you are an anarchist, you're politically going to be really ineffective, because we'll get back to the thing of what do liberals actually stand for.
We are up against a break for news. Spencer Critchley, we are talking about his new book, The Liberal Backbone. We are going to be right back after the news.
Remember, when you get to work, to hop over to WCPT820.com or the TuneIn Radio app and stream The Stephanie Miller Show. Weekdays 8 to 11 a.m. on Chicago's Progressive Talk, where facts matter. Because facts matter. You're listening to WCPT 820.
Joan Esposito, live.
Celebrating our power to bring about change.
Local.
Everybody has to work together.
And progressive.
I think you get the idea.
On WCPT 820.
Spencer Critchley is the author of the book Patriots of Two Nations. He also hosts the podcast Dastardly Cleverness in the Service of Good. If you go to his Substack or the webpage for the podcast, you can sign up to get chapters of his new book, which he is releasing chapter by chapter. The book is called The Liberal Backbone, and we are talking... How many chapters do you have written now, Spencer?
5.
5, okay.
Yeah, one a week for 5 weeks. I didn't know I'd be able to do it this fast, but I don't know if I can keep it up, but we'll see.
Well, we were talking about definitions of terms. We were talking about core principles and, what it means to be a liberal and what you believe in. Let's move on to the next point you make. I don't know whether it's in the first chapter or the next chapter.
Well, I've spent the first few chapters having sort of set up that premise that I think liberals are confused about what they stand for, and as politicians have become ineffective at standing for it.
I agree with that, and I think that people are very confused. So let's back up a second before we move on. What would be, if there was a politician that wanted to speak to a group and tell that group what they stood for, what would be the kinds of sentences, the messages? We already talked about Not just saying I believe in freedom, but I believe in individual freedom as long as it doesn't hurt anybody else. What other statements would you want to hear so you know what somebody believes in?
Well, actually, in the context of a political campaign, it should be mostly about very simple messages, and most of the focus on the nonverbal component, just introducing yourself as somebody that people like and trust to be a strong leader for people like them. It really comes down to about that. And that most of that is nonverbal. And one of the ways that I think that liberals and the Democratic Party in particular keep going wrong is they keep thinking, we just need to do some more polling and come up with a message that works better. And I really don't think that's it. I don't think that there is a message that in itself matters very much. It's much more.
Because I've kind of been one of those people saying that.
Because we, as liberals, we tend to be so rational. We tend to think everything is about information. And so we look at something like the incredibly successful Obama campaigns, and we think, it's because he had that hope and change message. That was a really good message. And you would see people copying that kind of thing, and they would copy the graphic design of his posters or the graphic design of his logo. And what they didn't realize is that's the tip of the iceberg. It was Obama as a person who seemed to embody a set of values that people really connected with, mostly non-verbally, mostly through the rhythm of his speech and his cadences and the way he looked when he was talking, and not the information content of his words so much as the poetry. One of the exercises I often do when I'm training on this subject is I take a passage from his famous 2004 Democratic Convention speech about there's no red America, no blue America, and I translate it into the standard kind of language we get taught to use in college that far too many liberal politicians use, where it's all information. So I translate it into language like, for example, listing liberal principles, and saying we believe in individual freedom, defined as the freedom of every one of us to do as they please and without fear of government, coercion. The way I was just talking a short while ago, because I was answering the question of what actually is it, but which is appropriate when you're explaining what it is. But when you're campaigning it just falls flat. And so in my trainings, I would translate it into the sort of academic intellectual language, perfectly clear, but just purely informational, that has come to dominate the way liberals talk. And then I would give people what Obama actually said. And what he said was things like, in America, we believe we should be able to tuck our children in at night without fearing a knock at the door. Mm-hmm. Like when the secret police come for you. Now that is the poetry of campaigning, and it only works if it feels authentic, if it connects with you culturally and feels like something you too deeply care about. And of course,
what if your authentic self is not charismatic? Joe Biden is a good man. I think he did many good things as president, but he's nobody's idea of a stimulating speaker. He's no orator. You don't feel like, throwing yourself into whatever project he's pitching.
Yeah. Well, and you don't have to be Obama. You're right. There are many ways to do this. It does need to feel authentic, and it does need to connect with people on an emotional level, which doesn't necessarily have to be soaring rhetoric like with Obama or beautiful poetry. And I will say Biden, for most of his career, has been a very effective politician and often a very effective campaigner, as he was in 2020. He was an underdog, and he won because his political instincts were right, and he did what I was describing in his own way. He'll never be an Obama, but in his own way, he got voters to see that they liked and trusted him to be a strong leader for them. And that's always the challenge. And before I forget, I'd really like to mention something that's going to emerge as a key concept in this book. I started in my discussion of Marx, but it's going to become a big concept. And that's the concept of alienation. And the idea is that historically we've been in a period of alienation going back to the rise of science and the Age of Enlightenment, when reason started to take over as the dominant mode of knowledge in our society. And in many ways, that's wonderful. We have science and medicine and incredible progress and incredible wealth by historical standards. All of that stuff is great. But there's been this process of alienation from a life where you feel immersed in the world and feel part of the world, because before the rise of science and the Age of Enlightenment, most people believed sincerely in God, whoever their God was, or they believed in, spirits. Many people believed in fairies and demons, and they believed that nature was inhabited either by God or by these spirits. And life was meaningful because you believed things happened for a reason. You might not be happy, you might be miserable, but you weren't suffering from a life that was empty and seemed completely pointless, and where the only point was to stay alive as long as you can and, make as much money as you can and try to buy some luxury and entertainment before you die. But since the triumph of reason and the Enlightenment, Western culture as a whole has suffered this great alienation from that way of being and is kind of cast adrift spiritually. Many people, of course, continue to be religious and do live in sort of the traditional way where they firmly do believe their life has meaning and God explains it, etc. But many people, especially educated people, are forced to live with constant doubt about what all of this means, or the possibility that it means absolutely nothing. And everything we think most about, meaning of life, beauty, art, love, is all just basically an evolutionary accident that's completely pointless. It's like the heat that's being thrown off the human machine while it gets about its main purpose, which is to survive long enough to reproduce and then die. So alienation is a core problem, because liberals, as increasingly an educated group of people, tend to be trapped inside what Max Weber, the sociologist, once called an iron cage of rationalism. And they are living in this alienated frame of mind, which they can more or less cope with because they're highly educated and maybe they can afford a lot of therapy, or they can afford, to study meditation, or they found some new spiritual practice that's helping them through this. But it's an extremely difficult and often even terrifying and at least anxiety-inducing way to live. And furthermore, because you're in this alienated state of highly developed rational thought, you lose connection with the poetry of the Bible, for example, or the poetry of ancient myths and legends, and you come to speak in a very alienated way that's highly rational and intellectualized. And when you speak to other people, you yourself are alienating, because you come across as if you, in effect, have no soul, would be the way it's often described. You come across as the sort of parody of the educated, northern, a white person, from England or Germany or somewhere who has no soul and can't dance and speaks in an oddly stilted sort of way. Somebody from my background, for example. And this state of alienation, liberals find themselves kind of trapped within this alienated mindset, I believe. And in politics, it's fatal, because politics is not about intellectual ideas and about the communication of information. Politics is almost entirely emotional, about how people are feeling. And if you have become alienated from the way most people experience life, where they are immersed in it for better or for worse, and you come across as somebody who is just like oddly disconnected from it all, so that even when you're trying to be one of the folks, it seems oddly stilted or studied, which describes all too many Democratic politicians, not all of them, but a great many of them. And I would say describes the thinking of the Democratic Party as a national organization generally, where everything is poll-driven, it's poll-tested. Mm-hmm. Everything is about the latest slogan or the latest policy points, which have been poll-tested. It's all analytical thinking as opposed to what actually works in politics.
The part about where politics is emotional, I did not agree with this for a second, but, there were all the people. Well, Kamala isn't winning over more voters because she's not spending enough time talking about policy. She needs to spend more time.
Exactly wrong.
Exactly.
I think that's exactly wrong. People have a really hard time getting this. I think as hard as it is to believe, almost nobody actually cares about policy. Now that doesn't mean policy doesn't matter, and it doesn't mean that people are suffering because they're not making enough money or they can't afford health care or child care. They can't afford groceries, whatever it is. It doesn't mean they don't care about fixing health care or fixing the child care problem. They do, but they don't care at all about the policy details. They don't care about the policy itself, right? They care because they love their children, or they care because they are afraid. These are very primal emotions, like love. I love my children. Or fear. I am afraid that if I lose my job, we are homeless. Mm-hmm. Or I am afraid that if my wife gets any sicker, she'll have to die because we don't have health insurance. That's the ways people care about policy. Even sophisticated people, they don't, if you're rich, they don't care about that. Most of them, some like tax experts care about the details of tax policy, but most even sophisticated, wealthy people don't care about the details of tax policy. They just want to hang on to their money, or they don't trust the government to spend tax money well, or whatever it is. But that's all about feeling. I don't want you to have my money because I don't trust you. That's all very basic primal emotions. So being more specific about policy is, I think, not only a waste of, but potentially very likely counterproductive because you'll be so ineffective as a campaigner. Now, what you have to do is people the feeling that you have really good policies. And liberals have a hard time imagining this.
Okay, that's interesting. I'm not going to bore you with policies, but you've got to feel. Is that why we get Donald Trump saying, it wasn't a policy, but food is too expensive. Elect me. Everything will be better.
That's basically, that convinces lots of people, and it convinces surprisingly highly educated, sophisticated people. This shocks me. I mean, how well-educated, intelligent, who you would think are nobody's fool, actually buy Trump. They actually honestly believe Trump is a good manager of the economy. I mean, and they sincerely. I mean, some of it's driven by an irrational desire, I think, to hang on to their money, or they find other aspects of what he stands for appealing, like the uglier aspects appealing, but they can't admit it to themselves. But the fact is, these are sophisticated people who actually, despite all the evidence, think Trump has economic policies that make any sense at all, and that he has any record of knowing what the hell he's doing with the economy or in business, that he was anything other than a serial failure who got lucky as a business person. But, this is what liberals, because I say they're living in a state of rationalistic alienation, they actually think that people make votes based on carefully considered examinations of policy alternatives and rational debates as if it's a university seminar or something. That is not at all the way politics works. And even when people were voting for people who I really thought they should vote for, like Biden, like Obama, most of those votes, those people didn't really understand the details of what they were voting for. Some did because they really care or they happen to be experts in that area. But most people were just basing their votes on, I like and trust this person, and I think he's going to fight for people like me. Well, he'll make the economy better, but that goes about as far as that, or he'll protect us from war, or he'll look out for the children or whatever. But it doesn't get much deeper than that. It gets down to I believe this person will do that. I'm choosing a leader who I trust will get that stuff done for me, and I don't actually understand how they're going to do it.
What about when you've got somebody like Trump who tells any particular audience he's in front of not the truth, not what he thinks, not what he plans to do, but rather just tells them what they want to hear? That makes somebody feel good. Is that what you're saying? That should be the way forward?
But this is the enormous challenge that liberalism is facing, and this is part of how liberalism and liberal democracy contains the seeds of its own destruction, because it's open to people like Trump. A liberal society is often called the open society. It's open to all ideas and almost all ideas, and almost all people, except people who are, trying to kill other people or hurt them or trying to tear the whole thing down. But it's because it's open, it's vulnerable. So it's vulnerable to demagogues like Trump, who are willing to just lie their heads off and deliberately exploit people's emotions, to deliberately exploit what I've been describing, the fact that we are wired to respond to politics emotionally. They know that, so they exploit emotion all the time. It's all about exploiting fear, resentment, anger, or irrational.
I agree with you that that's what's going on, Spencer. What I don't understand.
It doesn't mean we have to be that way.
But that's the core of the Republican Party. Get people to feel something, and the easiest thing is to make them feel anger, make them all angry about something. But they've been doing this for a while. How have people not wised up to this? Oh, there they are again, trying to make me mad.
Somehow humanity is always vulnerable to this. I believe, and the psychologists will back me up on, this is wired into us by evolution to make decisions this way. We make very fast, emotion-driven decisions because in the wild that works better. You survive longer if you do that, because you only have a split second to decide, is that something scurrying in the underbrush that I could pounce on and eat and thereby survive? Or is it a very dangerous predator like a snake or a lion or something, which I must flee and therefore survive? And you cannot sit there like the way Carl Schmitt described liberals and decide to gather the tribe and sit down and appoint a committee and consider all the alternatives.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's why it works so well. And demagogues have been doing this since people first noticed there were such things as demagogues back in classical Athens. There's this demagogue known as Cleon, who was one of the first identified demagogues who did exactly this. Demagogues have been popping up throughout history. The founders of the United States, the demagogue was one of the people they most feared, and they explicitly, in multiple places, including in the Federalist Papers in multiple places, they warn against demagogues, and they describe essentially Donald Trump. They essentially warn against people who have mastered the petty arts of deception, if I'm remembering that right, for example, and who excite the passions of the crowd, but who lack the character to be leaders and they're driven by personal ambition. They knew this was one of the greatest threats to the survival of the democratic republic. And they were basically, if you read it, it's chilling because they're describing Donald Trump perfectly. But this is something humans are always vulnerable to. Again, if liberals are going to defend liberalism, they have to know that, and they have to know how to campaign against it effectively. Hence the idea of the liberal backbone, rediscovering your backbone and learning how to stand up and stand straight.
Yeah.
And so that means as a campaigner, you need to appeal to people emotionally. You need to master the arts of a demagogue, frankly, but you do it honestly, with good intention.
You master the skills of a demagogue, but do it honestly? Okay.
That's exactly what Obama did. Technically, Obama was a demagogue because he understood how to excite the passions of the crowd by appealing to their emotions. But he was doing it honestly with good intentions. He wasn't lying to them. His intentions were laid out there. He told you what he stood for, and he actually meant it. He wasn't going to suddenly surprise you, and you weren't going to find out he was actually an authoritarian or a crook. And I know that from working inside the campaign. I don't want to exaggerate my role, but I was enough inside the campaign to hear Obama on phone calls and to interact with all the other people on the campaign, including the people, leading it, and to know that from top to bottom, that campaign was an honest expression of what Obama stood for and was being run honestly as a campaign. So it is
Give
totally
us an example
possible.
of that, of something that indicated what he stood for in a clear way that still he was able to have resonate emotionally with people.
Well, for example, what I just said in that speech about when describing freedom from a repressive government, describing it as, in America, we believe you should be able to tuck your children in to bed at night, knowing that they'll be safe from that late night knock at the door, for example, to talk about it in those terms. He would do that repeatedly. If you go back and watch or listen to those speeches, the language was poetic. It was descended from a tradition. One of the major streams that he was drawing from was the civil rights movement, which is very much tied to the black church, which produced people like Martin Luther King, where oratory, or going back to slave days, the oratory of the black churches, going back into the 19th century, for example, the preachers would be, in many cases, masterful orators using the cadences of the Bible. And Obama was very much part of that tradition. He knew what he was doing, and he would draw on other, great speakers. And a lot of what he was doing was all about the imagery and the rhythm in what he was doing that was communicating with people so powerfully. And the thing is that those are essentially demagogic skill. It's a technical term, so it doesn't have to be pejorative. And it becomes positive when you're doing it honestly with good intentions, which, as I say, I witnessed with my own eyes and ears, was the case on the Obama campaigns. There was never a moment where you could detect that, this is actually the usual, sleaze and manipulation. That was just not happening. And it's crucially important, I think, for Democrats to understand what works and doesn't work in this regard. In my own work, I've often described what I've attributed to Obama here as giving the truth a fighting chance. So you can't just tell people factually accurate information and win a campaign or persuade them of anything. Information by itself has almost no persuasive power. No matter how smart the person you're talking to is, they might like to think of themselves as the sort of person who makes purely rational decisions, but they're, in fact, deluding themselves about that. And so giving the truth a fighting chance means you're not going to just give people factually accurate information. You are going to appeal to their emotions and do your damnedest to persuade them, to make them come around to see things the way you want them to see things. But you're going to be telling them the truth. And they will remain free to disagree with you. They can open themselves up to the risk of being persuaded and decide in the end that they are not persuaded, and they can go away from that interaction, and neither of you have not victimized them, and they have not been victimized. And that is, I think, the way forward for Democrats, is to rediscover these basic truths of persuasion and apply them that way.
I want you, as we wrap this up, I want you to tell people again the easiest way to get the chapters as you write them, because I'm going to have right after in January, the first of the year, January 6th, Spencer's going to come back, and there will be a quiz. So what's the easiest way to get the chapters?
So if you go to dastardlycleverness.com, they will appear there in full. And already there are 5, and they'll keep showing up there. Also, as an alternative, you can go to substack.com/@Spencer Critchley. There are
Excellent.
5 chapters that have shown up there and will continue to show up. And you can subscribe to me on Substack, and I really hope you will. I'm pretty new there, so I only have a few subscribers, and I really hope you'll subscribe to me there. And if you want, you can sign up for my email list, which is at dastardlycleverness.com. You can sign up, and then I will email you the chapters along with other things, and with a firm promise never to spam you and never to share your email address with anybody else.
Well, this is really helpful, Spencer, because since the election, I've had people say, please give us an idea of books we can read or organizations we can join. People feel like they're really motivated to refuse and resist. So this is our first book club book.
Good.
All right.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I'm also, one thing I did this before COVID. I was organizing events called Saving Democracy back when what we're seeing now was only a threat. And people seem to find those very useful. And I'm hoping to get back to organizing events as well. So maybe down the road we can, might be able to offer that as an invitation to people as well.
Excellent, excellent. Spencer Critchley, author, Patriots of Two Nations. It is always a pleasure. Thank you so much for being here.
Joan, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
We will see you again in January. And we are now going to take a break and be back with more after this.
Take Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive with you on the go by using the TuneIn app on your phone. Just search for WCPT 820.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
We are very happy to welcome to our program David Toscano. He's an author. He's a former Democratic leader in the Virginia House of Delegates and has a newsletter called The Fights of Our Lives. David, so nice to have you here.
Oh, it's great to be with you this afternoon. Thanks.
The first thing that I'd like to talk to you about is your governor, Glenn Youngkin. There were rumors that he was kind of hoping that the whole Republican primary process for president would come apart at the seams and he would step in and be the hero who brings it all together. That didn't happen. But I do occasionally, especially more recently, I'm seeing his name in the news again. He seems to be trying to get back out there on the national stage. What is your take on him?
Well, Youngkin is a fascinating character and really was unknown before he was elected governor a couple of years ago in Virginia. And it's true that he sees a national role for him. He had hoped, I think, that Trump's candidacy would have crashed and burned, but that didn't happen. And so since that time, he's been cozying up to the MAGA wing of the party. Just today, he announced that he's willing to use our National Guard in Virginia to help Trump with mass deportations and to go to Texas and other places to be part of Trump's fight to deport people. Now, no one's quite sure about the implications of that. He has been willing to do that in the past, but it's very small numbers of people that he sent. You know, National Guards are essentially the people's militia, and these people have regular jobs, and when they're mobilized, they have to leave their jobs and leave their families. And it's not at all clear how people are going to react to that. I can tell you this, Trump is not well loved in Virginia, especially in Northern Virginia, where most of the votes are cast. And so from personal experience, when Trump was in the White House, the House of Delegates originally was controlled 67 to 33 by Republicans. And in that 1 year after Trump came in, the House, we almost took the majority, and the next election we did. And a lot of that had to do with antipathy to Trump, largely out of Northern Virginia and with all the federal employees there.
So, I'm hearing people say, well, right now the country doesn't remember how much they disliked him as president last time around. So when the midterms come in, 689 days, Democrats have a real shot at being back in power nationally. You sort of saw that same kind of thing work out in Virginia. So do you think that those people are calling it correctly?
If we have an election. I mean,
no, we're not. No, we're not going.
I'm not going to catastrophize about it. No, I think that we will have an election. I think there will be massive backlash against Trump, and I think you'll see it also in Virginia. Our first big issue is next year we have a governor's race. We're one of the few places in the country that have off-year governor races. And Youngkin cannot succeed himself. So there will be a Republican who will run, and that Republican probably will run on Trump's coattails. And we're going to see how popular Trump really is. The other thing is people don't realize, and Youngkin doesn't realize, that there are a number of Trump policies, particularly the policy of cutting Medicaid. I'm not talking about cutting Medicare. That's like the third rail. But cutting Medicaid
from the 90% reimbursement rate that the feds provide to the states now for expansion purposes will end up meaning you kick off a lot of people, kick them off the rolls who are in districts who largely voted for Trump. And they're about ready to get hit with something that they won't really like. And I think some of that will backfire against Youngkin because he's been such a proponent of the Trump program. We'll see. It's hard to predict in politics, but we think that's about a $3 billion hit in Virginia. I mean, the same dynamic occurs, I'm sure, in Illinois. You have Medicaid expansion, and a lot of people who benefited by that were downstaters, people who didn't have as much money. They had too much money to qualify for Medicaid initially, but they had too little money to buy their own insurance. And so they were left in this gap. In Illinois, I think, was one of the first states to expand Medicaid, partly because the feds were reimbursing the state.
Yeah, it was like free money. And it amazed me the number of Republican governors who said no to it. I mean, I don't understand that. I mean, yes, you don't want to make Joe Biden look like he's got a victory, but dear God, those are people in your state. Those are potential voters for you.
Yeah, and it really helps people. And now we're going to see maybe 758,000 people in Virginia potentially kicked off the rolls because there's a little language in the budget amendment that allowed Medicaid expansion in Virginia that said if the reimbursement goes below 90%, you're off the rolls. You're out of expansion. And there's about 6 states like that in the country. So sometimes you got to be careful with the policy provisions you propose because they end up hurting people big time. And a lot of those people potentially voted for you.
Yeah. David, we need to take a real quick break. I'm talking to David Toscano. He wrote a book, Fighting Political Gridlock. He's a former Democratic leader in the Virginia House of Delegates. We're going to be right back after this.
Get social with WCPT 820 and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at WCPT 820.
Hey Google, play WCPT.
Streaming Chicago's progressive talk from TuneIn.
Attention, everyone. Don't turn that dial. Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, returns right now on WCPT 820.
I'm joined by David Toscano, who's a former Democratic leader in the Virginia House of Delegates, wrote a book called Fighting Political Gridlock, and has a newsletter, Fights of Our Lives. Your newsletter, I thought was really interesting, David, especially when you wrote, "A president is not a king." Did you send that newsletter to the Supreme Court? Do you have their addresses? Should we look up their email addresses together?
Yeah. I've lost a lot of hope in the Supreme Court. But,
Amen.
There are a lot of other options that we have at our disposal where we can fight. And first is just simply to recognize that this country was built on the concept of opposition. We didn't set up the system of checks and balances just so that everybody could play fun in the sandbox. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of things to be vetted. There are a lot of problems to work out. I made that comment earlier in response to your question. I said, if there's an election. Well, I think there will be an election in 2026 because I don't think Trump can stop anything like this because our elections are run in the states. If we want to get back to a place where we can really have an impact on this country, we got to look back to the states. We have been neglecting the states for years. It goes back to the Obama years where everyone thought that Obama was going to be the transformational president. Everybody said, well, let him do it, and they all forgot the states. And in 2010, Obama got creamed in the congressional elections, but what really happened is a tremendous change in the state elections and the state composition of state representative houses. What did that mean? Well, that meant when redistricting came, the Republicans were in control, and they could draw the districts not only to save themselves, but also to change the character of the United States Congress, because they were drawing the lines. They were fixing the game, and they did a masterful job of it. In Wisconsin, you look at that state right by you, Scott Walker gets elected in 2010. The Republicans take over and even get to a supermajority because they could redistrict. At the same time, you're electing a Democratic governor like Tony Evers. So you got to get back to the states, because that's where a lot of this stuff is happening, and that's where a lot of the change that ends up in the Congress gets generated in the first place by redistricting.
I agree with you, and I believe that that was one of the most strategic errors in the last recent history of the Democratic Party, focusing too much on national. And then suddenly everybody wakes up and it's like, well, what do you mean? What do you mean they're redistricting and they've got a supermajority and they're passing all these? What do you mean? Well, yeah, state reps, state senators, those positions matter. Usually when we come up to an election, I remind people, yeah, it's great. Vote for your congressperson, vote for your senator. But the people who affect your life on a daily basis, they're your local officials. They're your state reps. They're on the boards that you're going to vote for. They are the judges that you vote whether or not to retain. Those are not the unimportant races. Those are the most important races for how you live your life. And boy, did we learn that the hard way.
Well, isn't it the case? But, like in Wisconsin last year, you elected a liberal judge. It flipped the character of the court, and now they're going to throw out redistricting that was hyper-partisan. Mm-hmm. In contrast, North Carolina, where they were hyper-partisan redistricting was thrown out 2 years ago, they elected enough Republicans to their Supreme Court that they reversed themselves. And now North Carolina has a supermajority, and they've got this lame duck session by which they're trying to strip the governor of every power.
Well, they pretty much have. He vetoed. They tried to basically, they had a few Republicans. They got massively defeated, but they had a few Republicans still in office. So with their supermajority in North Carolina, the Republicans in the State House voted to pretty much take away any of the power of the Democratic governor or the Democratic attorney general and give it to the Republicans who are left. They have the auditor. Let's give all this stuff, all this power to the auditor because it's one of the few Republican seats we retained. And they had a supermajority. It was vetoed, and they voted to overturn the veto. So, yeah, what a mess. And I remember there were people. This is, I understand a lot of these people, they'd already been voted out of office, so maybe they figured they had nothing to lose. But there were North Carolinians in the State House protesting, screaming at these people. They saw what was being done, and the voices didn't seem to matter. They didn't seem to matter, David.
Well, the story is not totally finished because some people say that was an unconstitutional action for a number of reasons. I'm trained as a lawyer, so I see some of these things in legal terms. I think they have a real problem under the North Carolina Constitution of upsetting the separation of powers that is embedded in that Constitution with their actions of this last week. Now, whether the Supreme Court will uphold that, I don't know. But certainly they got a pretty strong argument on it. So we'll see.
Yeah. So how do you see...
Who you vote for makes a difference.
Yeah. I mean, if as predicted, we do get this backlash to Donald Trump, and the Republicans in Virginia are held to account for the things that they don't like that Trump is doing. What do you see in the midterms and beyond for elections in Virginia?
Well, Virginia has been on a pretty good arc over the last 10 years. I actually wrote another book. It's called Bellwether. It's about my 10 years in the Virginia legislature when we moved from a reliably red state to one that was blue, starting really with the Obama election or Tim Kaine's election to governor in 2006. But I think Youngkin is an anomaly, a Republican elected governor of Virginia, because I think it is really much more of a deep purple or even a blue state. So I think that Virginia is going to be fine. It's kind of weird because, here it is, the capital of the Confederacy, and its politics are so different than North Carolina, which is right next door. The politics are more like Maryland in some ways because of the Northern Virginia, the power of the Northern Virginian vote and how close it's tied to Washington. But we'll see, because every election is different. It depends a lot about the character of the candidates. Look at North Carolina. The Republican candidate for governor was abysmal. So
my
they didn't
goodness.
really have a chance.
Mark Robinson, the self-identified black Nazi. Woo.
Yeah, really weird. But, Republicans have been making mistakes of fielding really bad candidates.
Why? I see that, too. And, that it doesn't make any sense. Do they think people won't figure out how bad these folks are? Do they figure nobody will pay attention? Do they figure it doesn't matter? I know some of the candidates are chosen because they're rich and they figured, oh my God, he can self-fund. So that's one relief we don't have to worry about. What's going on there? If you and I can see that they're terrible candidates, why can't they?
Well, part of it's the primary voter who comes out and selects the candidate in the first place. They tend to be much more highly ideological than the regular voter in the regular election. And so they tend to move towards a more right-wing or conservative person, not fully understanding their background. After the person gets nominated, then all this research is done. You find out the background. You find out that they really aren't that good of a candidate anyway. At least that's what it appears to have happened with Robinson's case. But it's happening all over the country. Terry Lake in Arizona, I mean, she proved to be a terrible candidate the first time around. They renominated her again. And, you can't win elections without good candidates. The Democrats have been fielding good candidates. And I think that over the long haul, the Democrats are going to prevail because you've got to have good candidates. You got to have good ways of getting their message to the public. And if you do that, if you're not hindered by gerrymandering, you're going to win. So it's a fight. Every year is a fight. And that's why the column is called Fights of Our Lives.
Yeah, that's one thing that I've learned is that you can't just pat yourself on the back because you get out every 2 years and you cast a ballot. You really have to pay attention to the people you didn't vote for and the people you voted for. And you can't just check back in 2 years later. You have to pay attention to what people are voting on, how they're voting, what bills they're supporting. It really is not just a once every 2 year job, isn't it?
I think that's true, and it's bigger than your state. Illinois is a pretty reliable blue state, especially in northern Illinois around Chicago. But, Wisconsin's always up for grabs. Michigan is always up for grabs, and they're not too far away from where people are in Chicago who reliably vote Democratic. There is no reason why you can't participate in another election. You can't vote there, of course, but you can canvass. You can give money. Think about giving money to a Supreme Court candidate. Who would have ever thought of that? Think about joining up with Sister District, which is out of New York, and they run field operations in competitive states where they target congressional races. It might be swing races or state rep races. Indivisible has a new platform, I think, that has to do with how you talk to people about races in a way that you can appeal to both their values and their sense of policy. Your earlier speaker did a great job in talking about the importance of values in connecting with people. But it's more than that. And so people who say, "Oh, Illinois is fine. I'm not going to worry. My congressperson's fine. I'm not going to worry." Well, think about this. Your congressperson can't do his or her job unless he or she has friends who are also elected to office, who can vote with them to get the majority. And you got to think of it in the bigger sense than just your immediate surroundings.
So, David, you thinking about getting back in?
I always think about getting back in, but I'm having fun. I'm doing my writing, and I spent 25 years in public life. There's a time where you got to give some of the younger folks a chance to do their thing, and I think that time is now.
Excellent. Well, David, thank you so much for joining us today and talking to us. You are now, by the way, you don't know this, but you are now my go-to voice in Virginia.
Oh, okay. Well, anytime you can have me on, and I got tidbits about a lot of other states, too, so I'm happy to be on.
Great.
Talk about anything you want.
David Toscano, former Democratic leader of the Virginia House of Delegates, writes the Fights of Our Lives newsletter. We are going to, in the coming year, he's going to be our person to tell us what's going on. I think we're going to find somebody in all 50 states so that, because you know what? You can't take your eye off the ball, and you can't just focus on Illinois. That is going to do it for me. Hey, Patty Vasquez has a couple of guest hosts tonight. Ken Mejia Beal and Dwayne Kennedy are going to be guest hosting for Patty. They're going to be talking to Josh Wheel, he pronounces it Wheel, Democratic candidate for Florida's 6th Congressional District. And tomorrow, Edwin Eisendrath has some great guests. Tamar Jacoby, director of the New Ukraine Project at the Progressive Policy Institute, and Josh Cowan, author of The Privateers, How Billionaires Created a Culture War and Sold School Vouchers, along with a couple of other really great guests. That's on The Big Picture Saturday, 1 to 4 p.m. I will see you on Monday. Yes, find something that brings you joy. Monday, we're going to be talking to Chris Bury, DePaul journalist in residence. That is always a fun time. I will see you then. Have a great weekend, please, and good night.